So, as you can tell, we are clearly taking a break from Zelda Tears of the Kingdom videos today to come back to my personal favorite topic, which of course is Metroid. And don't get me wrong, I love talking about and theorizing about Tears of the Kingdom because it is the most exciting game right now. But man, I've had so much to say about that game. I still have some more to say before the game releases in only a couple of weeks. But I'm always thinking about Metroid, and I really kind of needed a change of pace. And so I thought it would be fun to dive into some of where I think the Metroid franchise might be going in the near to distant future. Now, the sad and unfortunate part, as we all know, is that we don't have any actual news or concrete evidence of anything to go on. This is just fans speculating and guessing. It's really all we can do when it comes to Metroid. But I think we have some signs that point to where some things may be going. And in my opinion, maybe I'm being the optimistic one here, but in my opinion, I think the few signs we can hold on to are definitely exciting and show that we might be getting some really cool things in the future. I think the most obvious and recent sign is the fact that only 2.5 months ago, we had the release of Metroid Prime Remastered, which, as we know, was the incredible shadow-dropped remaster/remake re-release of Metroid Prime that happened during the Nintendo Direct in February, and it was just such a huge deal. And oh my god, I talked about it and covered it like crazy. And as a lot of you know who have been around for a while, Metroid Prime is already my favorite game of all time. So to see this incredibly remastered and remade version release on the Nintendo Switch and the shadow drop and everything about it, man, so great. And it really showed me, and I think it showed us as Metroid fans, that Nintendo is paying attention to Metroid again, and they're willing to take pretty big chances with a franchise that a lot of people, I think, want to call obscure. And I don't really think it's as obscure as some people may say. So I found this to be a great sign that Nintendo was willing to do something like this. Now, you could argue that it was a bit of a safe choice, only in the respect of Metroid Prime being a very famous game with a very strong legacy. It was previously the best-selling Metroid game of all time until Metroid Dread in 2021. So, I mean, it basically took 20 years for that game to be surpassed in sales. So, yes, is it a safe choice to take that specific game and release it the way they did? Yeah, but that doesn't mean it still wasn't a bit of a big swing, just considering the Metroid franchise's legacy. And so maybe we have a sign that they're looking at doing other things, such as remastering and remaking other Metroid games. We can't forget that in 2004, Nintendo remade the original Metroid game with Zero Mission on the Game Boy Advance. Then, of course, in 2017, they remade Metroid 2 with Metroid Samus Returns on the Nintendo 3DS, and then of course we get the Metroid Prime Remaster just this year. And so we've seen evidence that Nintendo, when the circumstances are correct, and when it's the right game, and when they have the right vision for it, they will find a way to remake or re-release or update certain classic Metroid games. They've done it 3 times before, which if you think about it is pretty crazy. Not to mention the Metroid Prime Trilogy release on the Wii, although other than changing the controls, they really didn't do much to the first 2 games. But it was still very cool that they were willing to do that. And so, of course, we set our sights on the future, and obviously Metroid Prime 4 will be part of this conversation. But there's also the case to be made for if Metroid Primes 2 or 3 will also be getting some kind of re-release. Now, I discussed this on a video, of course, after Metroid Prime Remastered came out. The only real sign we have to this is the fact that Jeff Grubb, who is one of the 2 people who was responsible for letting us know that there was a Metroid Prime remake in the works, he said that there was also re-release plans for Metroid Primes 2 and 3. So to eventually see Metroid Prime Remastered released, even though it was 4 months after his prediction, the fact that it did come true shows that he and Emily Rogers probably did know some real info about that game. So the fact that that released makes us wonder, well, was he also correct about Metroid Primes 2 and 3? There is a huge chance that he's not correct, so I'm not saying it's a fact. It's just something to consider and think about when we look ahead at what might be happening with Metroid. Which, of course, brings us to Metroid Prime 4, and I know I've talked about this game 100 times on this channel since it was revealed, and I've talked about it even a lot lately, especially in the wake of Metroid Prime Remastered, you know? I was talking about it a lot when Metroid Dread was releasing. Obviously, with Metroid Prime Remastered, with each new release, we have a reason to think about Metroid Prime 4 again. And it's really pretty wild when you kind of put the pieces together and you're like, man, in the span of 2 years, Nintendo really released 2 very high-profile and super successful and super loved Metroid games with Metroid Dread and Metroid Prime Remastered. 2 Metroid games in 2 years, that makes it feel like it's like the mid-2000s again, because if you go back to the 2000s, you might be shocked to realize how many Metroid games released between 2002 and 2010. It's like 8 or 9 games or something absolutely crazy. And so Metroid Prime 4, man, it's the eternal question. When will we see the game? When will the game officially release? And what platform or platforms will it release on, right? And so I know I'm obviously treading prior topics that I've discussed and broken down in the past, so I don't want to overly explain this. But just as some refreshers and reminders on kind of where I stand on this, I do think that Metroid Prime 4 almost for sure will be shown to us this year. There are reasons to believe that that's happening. I do believe that that is going to happen from the things that I know and have heard. And it also, I think, just kind of logistically makes sense and lines up with how Nintendo might have to prepare us for their future projects. And to me, it lines up with Tears of the Kingdom releasing only next month in May, so their biggest game of this year and one of the biggest games of the generation, probably even the biggest single video game release in the year of 2023. That comes out in a couple of weeks, and after that, when we look specifically at Nintendo, other than Pikmin 4, which will be great by the way, don't sleep on that game, it's going to be amazing, but after Pikmin 4, we don't know anything, right? And so, next-gen hardware, Metroid Prime 4 information. Yes, I think we're going to get information about both of those things in the back half of this year. And if there's any truth to this prediction and guess, which as you know, I've felt for about 3 or so years now that this would happen this year, if there's any truth to this, one or both of those things being discussed and confirmed before this year is over, then I think it also stands to reason that Metroid Prime 4 could also line up as a launch title or a cross-generational release on whatever the next generation Switch 2 device turns out to be. And so it's because of this that my general thought and prediction and the things that I believe is that Metroid Prime 4 will be shown and revealed this year. We can't forget that February last year, Retro Studios updated their Twitter banner art with this really awesome image of Samus in a setting and with a color palette and doing something that we've never seen, right? Well, maybe not doing something because, to be fair, she's standing there. But I'm just saying that everything in this image, with the exception of just Samus being Samus, is new. There are no true hints at any prior games that this would be another re-release of a game like Metroid Prime 2 or 3 or even like a Super Metroid remake that people want. I think that this is, and you know, it's just a Twitter banner so you can joke about it, but myself and other Metroid fans talked about this a lot back when this happened last year. And I just personally believe, I don't know any inside information on this, so this is just me as a fan. I am purely speculating as an optimistic Metroid fan here. I think that was a hint at Metroid Prime 4. I think that is some kind of concept art or something official about the game. Retro or Nintendo never said anything about it. It just popped up and has been sitting there for the past year. But when I look at it and when I consider the context, yeah, I think that has to do with Metroid Prime 4. And yeah, there are some conversations out there that maybe Metroid Prime 4 is going to release this year because maybe it's closer to being done than people think. And so here's my take on that. Do I think the game is closer to being done than people think? Absolutely. That's why I've been talking about it so much the last year or so, because people seem to forget that game development is an everyday occurrence. Like, Retro has been working on that game since 2019. So I know it's fun to joke and say, oh, Metroid Prime 4, it's going to be, 30 years before we see that game release. But that's not actually the case, man. Like, they've been making that game. And yes, 4 years of development and 4 years of silence is a long time, but it's a long time for them to have been making the game. So I do believe that Metroid Prime 4 is closer to releasing than the average person does. Do I think that that means it's going to release this year? I mean, there's a chance, but I still mostly think we would just see it revealed this year and finally see a trailer and gameplay and all this stuff. And I really do just believe that next year in 2024 is the time we're going to see it. Because more than anything, I think that the next-gen console and Metroid Prime 4 will be revealed this year. And both, if I were a betting man, I would say slightly err on the side of releasing next year. Anything is possible. Maybe one or both also releases this year as well. I mean, it is on the table. I'm not ruling it out. But I lean more towards seeing them this year and then playing these things next year. So how would Metroid Primes 2 and 3 fit into this conversation? That part's tough to say, because obviously they might not even be making those games. There could be no truth to that. But if there is truth to it, do they release Metroid Primes 2 and 3 throughout the rest of 2023 and then reveal Prime 4 and then release Prime 4 next year? I mean, that's something I discussed a few months ago, and I like that idea, and I think it's possible, but I just don't know, man. I mean, like I said, maybe they're not making those games. So it's kind of hard to fit in the idea of a Primes 2 and 3 re-release and match it up with what we think might be happening with Prime 4's timeline, but it's all speculation, so technically all options are on the table. Now, the last thing I do want to talk about is a very interesting rumor that I think does have teeth to it, which is why I discussed it when this rumor was going around a couple of months ago. And you guys might have noticed in 2023, I've done a lot of speculating like I like to do, but I haven't been discussing a lot of the rumors that have been going around because I personally, when it comes to rumors and leaks, and I do certainly hear things, I feel very fortunate. I'm privy to things based on some connections that I've made over the years. I'm very choosy with how I talk about rumors and things that I think are worth discussing and things that I think aren't. And so there's been a lot of stuff going around in 2023 that I've chosen not to really talk about in depth. You may or may not have noticed. And that's just my choice. Doesn't mean anything is right or wrong. That's just how I've chosen to analyze what I've seen going around this year so far. But when it comes to this other Metroid rumor a few months ago, this one to me definitely kind of made sense. And it was that Mercury Steam was already hired to be working on the next 2D Metroid game, the game that would be following up Metroid Dread. Now, obviously the first thing we think is Metroid 6. Would this be a direct sequel to Metroid Dread and it's going to be Metroid 6? And yes, maybe it absolutely could be, but I also think there's a chance that maybe they do something different. To me, the next 2D Metroid game, especially if it is made by Mercury Steam, which by all accounts, why wouldn't they be making it? Why wouldn't Nintendo have said, yes, please make another 2D game? You made a game that became the best-selling Metroid game in only 6 months' time. It's crazy. And everyone loved it, and it was nominated for Game of the Year. It won Best Action Game of the Year. I mean, it's a phenomenal game that was critically and commercially very successful. So if Mercury Steam is willing to make another Metroid game, there's no reason Nintendo wouldn't have them immediately start working on the next game. But what that game is going to be, and I might actually make a separate video about this, but whatever it's going to be is going to be a real sign into what Nintendo is doing with Metroid going forward. Because Sakamoto discussed before Dread came out that it represented the end of the plight of Samus versus the Metroids. And the way that game ends and what happens with Samus and her Metroid DNA and the X-Parasite and her taking off and where that story leaves Samus and the lore of that universe means that the next game could be Metroid 6 or it could be the beginning of a whole brand new era of Metroid and Samus storytelling. That's actually my main prediction, believe it or not. And so, again, I don't want to go too much more into theorizing here because that's not the point of this video, but like I said, I might make a video about that pretty soon here. I just wanted to point out that one of the other things that we might see in the near future for Metroid is that next 2D game, right? So you get Metroid Primes 2 and 3 possibly on the table for re-releases in some fashion. We obviously have Metroid Prime 4 as the confirmed game. And then we have the possibility of the next 2D game more than likely being made and developed by Mercury Steam. In my opinion, when you take all of this together and realizing only 2 months ago we also got Metroid Prime Remaster dropped, it's pretty remarkable what's happening with Metroid, and many times over the past year or so, I've referred to us living in a bit of a Metroid renaissance, and I think that bundling all of these projects and concepts and theories, and rumors, by the way, together really paints a pretty exciting possible future for Metroid. I believe that things are going very well. I think Metroid Prime 4 is going to be amazing. I think we're going to see it at the end of this year, which means if that happens, we would have a Metroid game release at the beginning of the year and then a new game revealed at the end of the same year. That would, I think, be a first. I can't think of any year going through my mental Rolodex here in real time that anything like that has happened for Metroid. So it's a great sign. I'm very excited for the future, and I can't wait to see what happens with Metroid next.